Rowan Ramsey, member for Grey. You're at the Yorke Peninsula Field Days today. How's it going out there?
Well, it's early days yet, but yesterday was good. It was pretty busy, and the weather wasn't too bad, but it did turn a bit nasty on us about 2 o'clock, and certainly our numbers dropped off after about 3, where people must have had enough dirt in their eyes. They thought they'd go home, I think.
Yeah, and you might curse me for saying this, but if people want to take an issue up with you, they can meet you at the Field Days the next couple of days. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'm in the Cyclone Pavilion, where I normally am at the Yorke Peninsula Field Days, so yeah, please drop in. We've had a lot of people drop in for a bit of a chat about state of play, and more than happy to see them.
Now, yesterday, coincidentally, the federal government announced this $2 billion loan facility for critical minerals projects, and by my research, it sounds like you're sitting on a fair bit of it in the electorate of Grey.
Well, 92.4% of the state stands to reason that most of the resource projects are in Grey, and pretty much they all are. All the current mines, apart from a couple of small ones, are in the Grey electorate. And historically, our role in the mining industry in Australia, the resources sector, has been focused on those big, heavy commodities. Obviously, coal, gas, iron ore is one of the big ones. Huge ships going out full of amazing stuff. But increasingly in the world, the scope is narrowing for important resources that we don't necessarily produce here, but in many cases, as with all things, we seem to have it in the ground somewhere.
Yeah, and I understand from some state government material that 65% of the nation's copper, graphite and zircon and halloysite, cobalt and rare earths and gallium is all sitting under the ground in South Australia.
Yeah, it's a hard place to explore, South Australia. It had a large drift of loose sand basically coming millions of years ago. So it's taken modern technology to actually find it underneath that overburden, but we are increasingly finding more of it. Obviously graphite is a big project, and the plan by Rediscore down in Arno Bay to get that mine underway, and they've got off-take agreements already. I think that one looks pretty good. It's going to go ahead. What we're talking about today is a $2 billion loan facility put up by the federal government. I don't know whether Rediscore need that money or not. They seem to be well advanced, but if they do need a loan facility, it's there for them. And then we've had in the past the prospect of rare earths being mined, and the establishment of a refinery in Whyalla, but it fell over, and that refinery eventually went to Malaysia, and I think that was a great loss for us. So I think we're pretty determined as a government is that we're seeing the need for sovereign supply, sovereign capacity, so anything we can develop to actually strengthen our own economy and ensure that we've got the supplies we need. So if you look at something like rare earths, it's controlled by the Chinese. They are the biggest producer in the world by a long way and have the ability to manipulate markets. I think the rest of the world is looking for an alternative supply.
Yeah, there's a whole range of high-tech applications for these critical minerals and rare earths, but one of the central points for some of that technology is battery technology and grid-scale batteries opportunities and the renewable market, and some of that is what we're going to be pulling out of the ground potentially in South Australia.
Sure, and we're in a great space. If you look at a lithium battery, I think around about 90% of it is either lithium or graphite. Now, we've got the graphite in South Australia, they've got the lithium in Western Australia, and there is already a cooperative research centre on developing battery technology to try and take that resource to the next level. So that's good. And then, of course, we're talking about kaolin today as well, the Great White Project out near Poochera and Streaky Bay District Council. I think it's a little further away. At this stage, they've processed up to about a tonne of this. It's another name for it is China clay, so it's very good for making porcelain. But it also has uses and increasing uses as an industrial coating. It's also used in things like cosmetics, and they've got an agreement now with a Chinese company to offtake, I think, 70,000 tonne per annum. And at this stage, they processed a tonne. But we know it's there. They know how to do it, and that's what they're proving up at the moment. And I should imagine this loan facility from the federal government to bring that commodity closer to the market would be of great interest to them, and make it my business to have a chat with them in the short time.
Well, that sort of project, for instance, also I think they use that for nanotechnology for cleaning up carbon dioxide in mixtures of gases. So it would seem that it's going to be one of those pin-up objects for the climate change debate as well, if you can use that sort of technology to get rid of CO2.
Sure, and I think you're right, Ricky. It's we've known, those of us with farming backgrounds, that fine clays have a very great role in filtering out all kinds of things, and when we talk about carbon filters and all those kinds of things, that's essentially what you're talking about. And so the clays, I think, are some of the oldest products now in demand, but still providing some of the newest products that are now in demand. So there's a lot of excitement around about the change of technology, not just about climate change, but on a whole range of platforms. And in that industrial sense, over the years, Australia has lost a lot of industrial capacity because of the price of the workforce here as compared to in other nations. But as we are seeing an increasingly computerised and mechanised manufacturing industry, you can see that field is starting to level out again, because it's just as cheap to run a machine in Australia. In fact, I think you could run the case that we're better off at maintaining and manufacturing and building these machines as it is in another part of the world. So the important parts are then that we keep our energy costs down and make sure there's enough flexibility in the labour market to deal with it. But I think it's an exciting time for Australia as we sort of reposition ourselves in this new world.
Yeah, and Wayne Phillips from the morning show was out there at the field days yesterday, and he was talking with the shed builders, and he picked up that there was a bit of a concern on the supply side when it came to steel for their sheds. And I guess you mentioned the industrial capacity, the Whyalla Steelworks, getting that up to the capacity where it can actually do those things you're saying at the cost competitive rate with China is a real priority.
Yes, Whyalla's going pretty well with the steelworks, and we're still waiting there for Mr Gupta to land his new finance deals. He was tangled up in stuff that happened overseas, really. But I've got great confidence it will, and that we will find a way for that plant. Just at the moment, there are all kinds of supply difficulties around the world, and it's not all about manufacturing. Some of it's freight. We're talking about, here at the field days, talking about very high fertiliser and chemical costs next year, and that doctors are tied up at the wrong end of the wars, on the wrong end of the supply chain, and all kinds of issues that have actually been exacerbated or brought on by COVID. We could all be sure that we will be applying ourselves to trying to iron out those difficulties. Now I'm planning to get some briefings from DFAT at the moment just about why those particular freight difficulties are persisting, because you can be pretty sure that every country in the world is trying to make everything it can and sell it. Just why we're having these difficulties in trading it is a good question.
Yeah, I almost let that pun slide through there about ironing out the difficulties with iron ore and iron steel production, but it's important that we, as an Australian nation, we can manufacture as much as we can for ourselves. So is there a case to be trying to sort of speed up the production at Whyalla and get the finance there to make sure we can actually scale up in the shorter term?
Well, look, Australia is, my understanding, unless things have changed, around about 85% self-sufficient in steel production, which is pretty good. Whyalla produces a particular type of product, long product. It doesn't, for instance, produce plate, but we do produce plate over on the east coast. So we're not badly positioned, but I think what we haven't been able to do in the past is export competitively. We've been able to hold our own on the import market, but I think that's where we need to get to the next level now. When we talk about the Whyalla Works, Mr Gupta has shown great interest in having an expanded facility there and new technology and driving towards green steel, which of course we've got a lot of money on the table as well to try and assist that transition. Now, if we can get on the front edge of some of these new technologies, and green steel is a real opportunity for us, we can actually change. We could change the starting price for Australia. We could change the position from where we come from in the world to really compete in these industries. Now, perhaps I'm being really optimistic, but I think that helps.
It's a bit like the argument with the Chinese. They positioned well on the battery technology, so they're a dominant player. Now you're saying that's the argument what Australia's trying to do with green steel.
Well, that is exactly right, and it's interesting on the battery. The biggest battery manufacturer outside China is South Korea. And in fact, when we talk about the Arno Bay Rediscore project, which I was just a little while ago, that is where we are planning to send the graphite in a refined form, ready to build anodes, I think it is, when it comes to the batteries, and really ramp up their production. And of course, sure, we're not making those batteries in Australia at this stage, but diversifying that supply and providing sustenance to companies in various countries, and I just don't mean one or two countries, I mean anywhere, to build that capacity will lead to a more competitive market and more assurance on availability.
Well, Rowan Ramsey, very generous with your time. Thank you. I'm sure you've got constituents wanting to talk to you, and if anyone wants to follow those topics up, they can catch you at the field days today and tomorrow.
Most certainly. Thanks, Ricky.